Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome to another video. This video is going to be a little bit different to usual. The focus is going to be more of a travel guide than a photography video, but you can bet that this video is going to be rammed full of photos. If you've been following me along over on Instagram, you'll know that I took a trip to the Lake District, and since getting back, I've had quite a few of you guys and family and friends get in touch and ask me how best to do a trip. This trip was actually my third visit, and I'm going to run you through the trip that we did and my recommendation on things to do. Now a little bit of background, because I guess it kind of matters in terms of fitness levels, as a trip in the lakes will involve quite a lot of walking, and the trip that I'm going to describe does include a fair amount. You don't need to be a mountain goat or anything like that, but just a reasonable level of fitness is kind of expected in terms of what I'm going to be describing. Down in the description I'm going to be setting up a whole bunch of links and bullet points that outlines the trip as well, so you don't feel like you need to write stuff down. It'll all be down there in the description. There is also going to be a link to a map, and it's the map that's on screen now, and it has plotted on it all of the places that we visited and a few other ideas too. So I guess before you leave, there's actually two main considerations. One of them is getting there. How on earth do you get to the Lake District? Well, for me, I live down in the south of England, and the trip up to the Lake District is quite a long one. It's 4 or 5 hours. The drive's not particularly hard. A lot of it's just driving straight up the M6, but it is a bit of a dull drive, and there's not really that many places worth stopping on the way. If you do want somewhere to stop, we actually stopped on the way up at somewhere called RSPB LEIGHTON Moss. It's a nature reserve predominantly aimed at birds, but it's a really good walk. There's lots of walking there. They've also got a few hides that you can just set up and chill out whilst you're kind of breaking up that travel there. We were quite lucky when we were there. We did see some marsh harriers and a few other birds too, like little egrets. Alternatively though, if you don't fancy driving at all, there is a train station in the Lake District. That train station is found in Windermere, and that is the heart of the Lake Districts too. From here you can quite easily do the hop on and off bus. I think it costs somewhere between sort of £12 and £13 a day for an adult, and you can pretty much get all over the lakes using this service. So don't feel like you need to take a car, but taking the car does give you that little bit of extra flexibility, especially if you see somewhere on the way where you want to just get out and have a walk. The second thing to organise before you set off, I guess, is where to stay. And I think my biggest advice with this is, even though things are quite close to each other in the Lake District, make sure you have a look at some of the travel distances. If you stay outside the lakes in places like Kendal and Penrith, the travel into some parts of the lakes is quite far. Even if it's not far in terms of miles and kms, it can be quite far in terms of time, especially at busy periods, as some of the roads aren't that great, even though they're scenic, but they can have an awful lot of traffic on them, and staying outside of the lakes can mean you end up spending quite a lot of time in the car. We personally stayed in Ambleside, and I love Ambleside. It's a small little town, and from there pretty much all of the places you'd want to go are sort of 30 minutes drive away, so it's a really good place to settle down. So I guess once you've got those two things sorted, what on earth do you do? So we'll run through the trip that we took recently and show you lots of images. We decided to work quite methodically based on the map. We worked from the top down, so the first thing we did was we headed off to Force Waterfall that's on Ullswater Lake near Pooley Bridge. It is a National Trust spot, so if you are a National Trust member you can park for free. If not, you do have to pay. Now most of the car parks we found on the lakes were National Trust, and they generally costed sort of £4 or £5 for the period of time that you'd want to be there. It is also a very busy spot, and we didn't actually make it here until the afternoon, but I would recommend you go in the morning. It was really busy and quite hard to park. There is 2 car parks though. There's a main one at the bottom, and there's a road that you can kind of take up to the top, and there's a smaller one up there. We were lucky enough to get into that smaller car park. The walk up the actual waterfall itself is so nice, and you can get involved and get actually into the rocks and spend some time actually near the water too. We were there were some people stacking stone, so we thought, you know what, let's give it a go. Now there's definitely an art to this. We were pretty terrible at it, but yeah, it was a little bit of fun, and it's nice to actually be able to get involved. There's a couple of viewpoints on the walk too, and they're also pretty spectacular, especially this sort of viewpoint where you've got the bridge up there and the waterfall itself. The actual fall of the waterfall is sort of like 65 foot, so it's pretty big and pretty impressive, but the views, the scenery, and it's quite an easy walk too, made it a lovely little way to start our trip. Whilst you're around here, don't forget to keep your eyes peeled for red squirrels. This is one of the spots that's known for having lots of them around. We didn't see any, but keep your eyes peeled because these are quite elusive these days when the grey squirrel came in. Once you finish there, I recommend that you head over to Pooley Bridge, which is just around the corner. It's kind of 5 minutes away, and from there you can grab yourself a spot of lunch. It's a nice little village just to take a little walk around, but most importantly they've got a really big car park there, and you can do your first bit of a walk around a lake. The Lake of Ullswater is the second biggest lake in the Lake District. It's pretty impressive, and from the car park there it's quite a flat walk, and you get your first taste of a real lake in the Lake District. From here we then actually headed back to Ambleside and chilled out for the rest of the evening and got ourselves some food. When it comes to food, I would recommend, if you're in a busy part of the Lake District like we were in Ambleside, that you book ahead of time. We actually struggled on some nights to actually get booked in anywhere, and I wish on the first night we'd stayed, we'd taken a bit of a run around and booked a bunch of things at different nights so that we didn't have to worry about food in an evening. If you are staying in Ambleside, some of the places we loved was a little Mexican tapas called S-Bar. There's also a pub that you can get into where you don't have to book. There is no booking, so it's a final resort if you don't have any options. That was called the Flying Fleece, or sometimes the Tap Yard. They seem to alternate depending on what day of the week it is. And finally, there's a little pub right in the centre called Priest Hole, and they did some of the best food we ate on the trip. On the second day, we continued our sort of quest on working from the top of the lakes towards the bottom, and we headed over to KESWICK. KESWICK is actually one of the biggest towns in the Lake District and is a pretty big hub for tourism. There's lots to do here, and there's lots of things to see and lots of cafes and restaurants as well. What I do recommend you do though, if you do go to KESWICK, is take a quick walk to something called Friar's Crag. It's a really short walk, probably takes sort of 10-15 minutes from the town centre, but you get some very good views over the Lake of Derwentwater. It also has at the end of there maybe the prettiest bench in the whole of the UK. Have a look at some of the photos that we took here. The views are incredible, and I think Derwentwater is probably my favourite lake in terms of how it looks, with the little islands out in the water too. From here, if you actually look up to the left, you can see something called Friar's Crag. There's a walk up there that we're going to be doing in the afternoon. So once we'd finished in KESWICK, we headed back into the town. We picked up some supplies because we wanted some water and some snacks, ready for our hike up WALLA Crag. To get to WALLA Crag, you just need to hop into the car. It's only sort of 5-10 minutes round the corner, and there was a car park there, another National Trust car park called Great Wood. I think you can actually do the walk from KESWICK, we just didn't. We decided that we'd take the car to Great Wood because there's a nice loop that you can do from there. If you haven't already used apps like All Trails, I'd suggest that you download them. All Trails is actually a really good app that you can put on your phone, and you can see all of the paths, and it kind of tracks you with GPS, and you can work out your own loops, and they also have lots of recommended walks built in. The loop walk was actually one of them, and we followed that just to make sure we were going the right way. The views from the top of WALLA Crag are some of my favourite views of the Lake District. There's so many good photo opportunities up here, and it's a reasonably easy walk too. Also, again, if you're into your birds like I am, then have a little listen out for some peregrine falcons. We were actually able to snap some photos of them. Up towards the top there's some cliffs, and you could see them nesting up there and flying around too. After a whopping 18,000 steps that day, we decided that we would call it quits, and we headed back for food again, and that was the end of our second day. Day 3, we actually had a bit of a slow start to begin with. We had a bit of a lay-in after all of the walking on the previous day, and then headed over to somewhere called Grasmere. Grasmere from Ambleside is very close, and I wish we'd got here a little bit earlier. Trying to park here was very tough. The car parks are quite small, and it's one of the most popular places to visit. There are two main reasons for wanting to visit Grasmere. The first one of these is William Wordsworth. He was a world famous poet that has some very iconic poems. He and his wife Mary have a very simple tombstone that can be found in the churchyard of St Oswald's Church. Secondly, there is some world famous gingerbread here, and you can go to the little shop there where it's been created with the secret recipe, and it's a bit more of a biscuit combined with a cake. It's somewhere in the middle than your traditional gingerbread, but it's very nice and it's definitely worth a visit. Once you've finished Grasmere, just around the corner from here is a little lake called Rydal Water. There's a little car park just there that you can park in, and we parked up there, another National Trust spot, so it was kind of like £4 or £5 to park again, and we tried to head up to Rydal Cave. I say tried because we got stopped pretty early on by a lovely little coffee stop, and it was kind of on like the connection between Grasmere and Rydal Water, and it was a really nice place to stop for lunch. Just after we stopped for lunch, then we continued our walk up to the cave. Now, I wasn't really sure what to expect from the cave, but I had seen some good reviews, and it was actually a pretty cool trip. It's not a very far walk, probably took 30 or 40 minutes from the car park, but the cave itself is quite big and open, and these like cool stepping stones that you need to step along to get into the cave. The cave itself isn't very deep, but it was nice and cold in there, and that was quite refreshing. We were so lucky on the trip that we had really good weather. It was kind of like 25, 26 degrees outside, and in the cave it felt really quite cold, and that was actually quite nice. It's a really good place to snap some photos though, especially with the reflections of the water up there, and it was a little bit of fun to go and visit. On the way back to the car though, we quickly stopped off at Rydal Water, the actual lake itself, and just chilled out down there for a bit. If you bought your swim stuff, it's probably be a pretty good place to take a dip, to be honest. We just didn't have the stuff with us, so we just chilled out on the edge and let time pass by a little bit. That afternoon, we actually took the rest of the afternoon off, mainly because England were playing and it was hard to miss that game. So we found ourselves a little pub, I think went to the Flying Fleece that day, and sat in there and had some beers whilst watching the football on our phones. So onto our fourth day then, and this was the big one. This was the day we decided to move away from the lakes and head up into the mountains. In the Lake Districts, you are spoilt for choice when it comes to mountain walks, but the two main ones really are Scafell Pike and Helvellyn. Scafell Pike, because it is one of the 3 peaks, is the highest peak in England. That's probably enough of a reason on its own for you to want to do Scafell Pike, but if you aren't that fussed about doing one of the 3 peaks, then you should definitely consider Helvellyn. Helvellyn isn't as high, but it is very tough, and it's got some of the best views of the lakes when you get up there. For both of these mountains though, you will need to consider about what you're packing and what you're wearing. Make sure you're safe, make sure you're packing lots of water, food, and you're wearing the right equipment and clothes to make it up there. We chose to do Helvellyn and it was incredible. There's multiple ways to do this and I advise that you look into each of them as they come with their own pros and cons. The most popular route is a bit of a circular route that starts from down in Glenridding, and you go up pretty high to begin with, and then you go around these 2 sort of mountain edges to get to Helvellyn itself. Now these edges are a little bit sketchy and I advise that you do some research if it is something that you want to do. They're called Striding Edge and Squirrel Edge. Striding Edge is the tougher of the 2, so if you're not sure, you can always head up there and do Squirrel Edge to go up and down. But yeah, definitely have a bit of a research into Striding Edge and make sure it's something you want to do. It was pretty tough. It's probably out of my own comfort zone. I found it a little bit uncomfortable at times because there's some pretty steep edges going down, but looking at the pictures, you can see why it's worth it. The views are incredible. If you're not the sort of person that wants to do the sort of more dangerous side of the mountain, then there is a much easier route, which is just more of a sort of mountain walk that you can do from the village of Thermere. All in all, it took us about 6 hours to complete the loop, which is about standard. So if you're going to do this trip, make sure that you set off at a pretty decent time. Don't set off too late in the evening, as you'll find it pretty hard to complete. I personally wouldn't have done the route we did if the weather wasn't perfect like it was. If it was windy or wet, I really wouldn't want to be finding myself on Striding Edge. One last thing to note about the trip is it is pretty tough on your knees on the way back down. It is quite a long way, and by the end of it our legs were shaking a little. But all in all, it was such an amazing day and by far the highlight of the trip. I just recommend that you research it and make sure you know what you're letting yourself into, but the photos and the experience itself made it so worth it and my favourite day of the trip. Day 5, we woke up pretty sore and we decided that we were going to spend most of the morning to begin with just chilling out in Ambleside. Even though that's where we were staying, we hadn't really actually spent that much time there, so it was a bit slow starting. Found ourselves a coffee, and with coffee in hand we decided to take a little walk up the waterfall in Ambleside. The waterfall can be found behind the Salutation Hotel and it's called Stockgill Waterfall. It's a really easy walk, but it's worth it, nice views, and again keep your eyes peeled for red squirrels as there's an opportunity that you could potentially see them here. Just after that we then jumped in the car and headed around the corner to somewhere called RSPB Castle. Now RSPB Castle, even though it looks very impressive, isn't actually a castle. It was built by a Liverpudlian surgeon back in 1840. It is a very impressive building. Again, National Trust, paid to park, but it was free to get in. When we were there, the rooms were actually empty. Everything had been taken out as they're about to renovate, but you could still go in and admire the rooms and the really cool ceilings. The actual grounds of RSPB Castle are also very nice. They do have a cafe there, so you could stop and get a food and drink, but you can also walk down to the Lake of Windermere and chill out down there. It's a perfect place to have a little picnic. In the afternoon, we then decided to actually head over to the town of Windermere. Something to watch out with Windermere is it is actually split into 2 sections. There is Windermere itself that isn't on the lake, and there's BOWNESS-ON-WINDERMERE that is on the lake. So this was the non-lake part. And we parked at the train station and did something called ORSETT Head. Now this is a really short walk, it takes sort of 20-30 minutes, but potentially has the best effort to reward ratio of any walk in the Lake District. The views from up here over the Lake of Windermere is so nice, and you can see for yourself. I took an opportunity to get the 70 to 300 mil out, because if you look straight off into the distance you can actually see Scafell Pike, and whilst we were there you could see the clouds rolling over Scafell Pike, and I couldn't help but zoom in and take some snaps of it. Whilst you're actually up at the top there is loads of benches and places to sit, so it's somewhere that you could go and just chill out for an afternoon if you wanted to and just waste a little bit of time. Day 6 then was actually our final day in the lakes, and we felt like there was one thing missing from our trip. We spent a lot of time walking around lakes and then actually going up some big mountains, but we hadn't actually got into the water yet. So we decided to pack up some bags and we headed over to BOWNESS-ON-WINDERMERE and booked a 2-man kayak. It was a kayak that you just sat on, so it wasn't like you were going to get stuck in it or anything, but this was so much fun. And the advantage of starting from BOWNESS-ON-WINDERMERE is there's actually some islands out in the water, so you can paddle over to them and you can actually stop on many of them. There is a private one, but most of them are free for people to just stop onto, and it kind of feels like you've got your own little private island. Again, I would recommend packing a picnic for this and sticking it in the wet bag, as there was something very special about just chilling out on our own little island in the middle of the lake. Price-wise as well, I thought it was pretty good. For 2 people, for 2 hours, it costed something around £30. I would probably recommend, if you are going to stop on one of the sort of islands and chill out for a bit, that you get a little bit more time than 2 hours, because it felt like a little bit of a rush by the time we'd stopped and then got back in. It felt like we were just paddling back as quickly as we could so that we didn't run over our time slot. So in terms of other places that I've been that weren't part of this trip, I would recommend some of the following. One of them is Buttermere. Buttermere is a lovely little lake up into the top of the Lake District, and there's not much there other than the lake, but it has some of the best views of the Lake District. There's a lovely little walk that goes round the Lake of Buttermere where you have to walk through some like little tunnels. That's definitely something I would recommend if you want to just take in the views. Next up, if you're into things like Beatrix Potter, make sure you have a little research, because the Lake District is full of Beatrix Potter stuff. It's not something I personally have much interest in, but if you do, it's definitely worth researching. They have a museum and lots more in the Lake District. Another random one would be in KESWICK. There is a pencil museum that has the biggest pencil in the world inside of it. Sounds very odd, but it's supposed to be a very good little trip and a good way to spend an hour or two. There's also a place I've been to called Tarn House that's kind of near the Lake of Windermere. It's kind of off to the side. It's quite close to RSPB Castle, so you could potentially do the two together. It's a very nice walk that you don't really need any sort of fitness capability to do. It's a pretty flat walk around the edge, but it's very, very pretty, and there's sort of like lily pads and things like that there. So if your fitness isn't all that great, it's still somewhere that you could probably go for a decent walk. And finally then, I guess if you're into castles in general, there are so many different castles around the Lake District. One of the ones that looks really impressive that I haven't visited is Lothar Castle. That looks like one which is predominantly still standing, and I would love to take a visit there. But if you're into your castles, definitely have a bit of a research, as there's plenty of options in the lakes. The Lake District is honestly such an amazing place to spend some time. There's so much to do there, and it's not really the sort of place that you could say you've completed in a week. It's the sort of place you could go to for a whole month and there would still be things you'd missed. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video, then hit me up down in the comments. I'll try and answer as many as possible. If you've enjoyed this video though, guys, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll be back to the camera content very shortly, I promise. Thank you for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!